speaking about the early years in Singapore, how has poetry changed, from uh, from from the colonial to the independence period? And do you think, uh, being an independent country like Singapore itself today, you know, uh, has that allowed a lot of room for innovation and creativity? Do you think that there's enough people, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Do you think there's enough emphasis for people to be more creative and innovative in the way they express and write?
I think the drive to improve the instruments of your own creativity is there irrespective of external circumstances. External circumstances can encourage you in peripheral ways, like providing more opportunities for conferences, for publication, for literary meetings and so on. But ultimately, you have to make yourself into a writer. It must come from within. Society can encourage or discourage. Now, we wrote poems at a time when there were hardly any avenues for publication, yet we wrote because we felt a need to write. The need is from within. It pushes you from within. But what has happened really over the years is that your subjects broaden. We are, as persons living in a rapidly developing society, changing our interests, adding to our interests constantly. There are new things to write about. But it doesn't mean the old themes are not there. Because quite often we go back to an old memory and write a poem out of it. So we broaden constantly. We look at life and context around us in Singapore. Like for instance, I wrote a poem on the merlion, Ulysses by the merlion, and that has generated a sort of subgenre over the years. Now, why did I write that poem? Because I told myself, look, Singapore has got so few myths, hardly any myths, and myths don't travel. You cannot bring in myths from our mother cultures, as it were, from China, from India, from the Malay world, and say, look, these are our myths. Now, the Malay world possibly, yes, because you have a Malay set of roots here. This is part of their world, so it's natural for them. But you cannot just import the mythology. So you have to construct your own symbols, your own icons, as it were. And I found the merlion a very interesting concept. Okay, people say it's touristy, etc. Doesn't matter. Now the Qilin, can we say the Qilin is not touristy? Can we say the British Lion when advertised is not touristy? No. Everybody uses it. Every institution uses every means available to fulfill its own purposes. So if you have the Union Jack, and if you look at what's happened in England recently, the Olympics and the Paralympics, they operated all their symbols. They exploited every bit, from royalty down. And they have to do it, and they're in a fortunate position of being able to do it. And the Brits are very proud, and justifiably so. You operate the symbols, you have them, use them. But when you don't have them, what do? You start inventing them, and symbols take a long time to emerge. We will have our icons slowly, the durian is becoming one slowly, and sands is becoming one, those three towers. These things will develop gradually, and they will come. So coming back to your question, yes, our interests broaden. We write about the life around us. And the only thing is that for us who have been writing for a long time, we have a greater bank of memories and of practices to draw on. And one very important element which seems to be missing, a strong sense of history, not only of Singapore. Because I asked once, long ago, when does politics become history? Which is the line and what are the factors? So we always have been concerned with politics, but we have to be concerned with history too. And one of the sadnesses is that Singaporeans somehow don't seem to remember the recent history or the politics of 10, 15, 20 years ago. And many of them don't even remember the history of the countries they come from, China, India, and elsewhere. So for me, because of my own experience, because of the shape of my life, because of the direction of my life, I've been fortunate. And I made the necessary repairs by reading up into history. So I have, in my work, a pretty strong sense of history.
do you think it's important for the government to to study and also reinforce perhaps creativity and innovation in Singaporeans, or should I say, or they call it critical thinking, so that they can be as artistic and creative as you are as a poet. And do you think Singaporeans are ready for it?
I think a country is always ready for it. There's, I don't think we can say, is the country ready for it? They should be ready for it any time. But your question really, is the government doing anything? I think the government is doing a lot. But ultimately, the creativity is the decision of the individual and of his family, like in many families.
How about yours?
In my own family,
were they against you being a poet?
No. My father left me free to choose what I wanted to do. And
Really?
yes. And he says, it's your life, he'll provide the means, and that's it. Now, I think with my children, the same thing. Except in the case of my son, I told him, you better do the sciences, because he was interested in doing literature. But I said, it's going to be a bit tough. I'm professor, head of department, and dean of the faculty. And I said, you're pretty good, and you probably do well, and you would look nice. So when you get these conditions coming in.
Now, how did your work got, internationally noticed? Because many are kind of like eager to look into some insights during the early years. You wrote poetry, and you must have compiled somewhere in your house or somewhat, even during the Japanese occupation. Do you have any recollection
Of what?
of your poetry or ideas or imagination?
My poems, I started writing late 40s, early 50s.
Oh wow!
When I was about.
But you did compile some ideas.
No. During the Japanese occupation, education was set aside. It was a matter of fitting into the family's attempt to make a living, to live properly, and to survive. To survive, because I come from a large family, and my father was a school teacher, and school teachers weren't paid very much. And you know what the Japanese salaries were like? It was the Chinese side of the family that was in business that kept us in rice, etc., etc.
And how much were they paid for the Japanese and the locals?
The teachers, not much really. And there was a joke as the occupation proceeded. They called it banana money. And I think just before the end of the war, a teacher's 1 month's salary probably wasn't enough to buy a catty of pork. You had this tremendous inflation. So you had support. My father's brother was a doctor, and he provided cash and means and so on and help. And my uncles, the Chinese side, they provided rice by the bags, literally, and so on. But during the Japanese occupation, I didn't write at all. It's only after the war. And you see, once you discover the excitement of words, or putting it together, you are stuck. And you keep on doing it. This is why, for me, the most recent poem I wrote, the one on Bukit Panjang, I keep on revising all the time.
And how were you first discovered about your work? Did someone actually saw your work and they decided to publish all your poems?
At school, yes. Fraser, Seamus Fraser. They published in school magazines, in secondary school magazines, and at one time the Singapore Standard, way back, had a literary section, and many of us were published there. There were these magazines, and the youth magazine, the secondary school magazine was a good avenue. So, and at university you had various journals and so on. After school you go to university and you meet fellow poets, Yi Tiang Hong, Wong Kui Nam, and you had very interesting people like Lloyd Fernando, who published my collection of poems, River of Earth, in 1956. He was a publisher, and so on. So there were very gradual opportunities, but no systematic opportunities. They had to be invented by the people who were interested. The students organize it, fellow students organize it. Like Lloyd Fernando, for instance, started a short-lived magazine, but a very important one called Write, W-R-I-T, Write, in which the first long poem I wrote was published, and where it was analyzed by one of my tutors, C.J. Francis. And Roy Fernando wrote the first long critical piece on my work in 1957. I just discovered it when going through the papers, going through my papers and so on. Now, this is how it developed, bit by bit, bit by bit. Everybody contributes a little bit.
And now, your influence, in poetry, how has that changed the landscape of Singapore and also the politics? Do policymakers actually took notice of your poems, including the man like Lee Kuan Yew?
you see, among our leaders, first generation leaders, Mr. Rajaratnam was a white reader. Mr. Rajaratnam. And when we used to go to Ensign Bookstore in High Street, quite often, you'll find Mr. Rajaratnam there browsing.
Oh.
And he was a very pleasant man. He'd always say hello and exchange a few words. And we many of us really enjoyed him. But I think of that generation, only he was the one who was a kind of white reader. And then you had others after that. Mr. Dhanabalan, for instance, is a reader of poetry. He did literature at school and literature at university as one of his subjects and so on. And right now, I think Mr. Thaman, our Deputy Prime Minister, is a reader of poetry. And I'm sure there are other readers of poetry among members of the cabinet. I don't know of. Obviously there are. But when it comes to promotion, remember, culture is the most difficult thing to promote.
Really?
Yes, because
here in Singapore?
no, anywhere.
Really?
When you promote culture, you don't know what is going to come out. When you fund something, you can't control the imagination. You can't tell them what you're going to do. You can only hope for something good to develop. And usually something does. And remember, culture and things, culture involves language, involves religion, involves so many things. Like look at what's happening in Europe. Caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. Come on. You can't have that in Singapore. I believe you shouldn't have it anywhere. There are certain areas where you don't touch. The Prophet Muhammad, is the Prophet Muhammad. You don't satirize and characterize him. You don't do that. But then people say freedom, you can do what you want. Now we can't have that here because why? We have got 10 religions. We've got sensibilities. We have to respect. So when you do that, you start out with the lowest common denominator, and then you gradually create additional spaces, bit by bit, bit by bit. You move the boundary markers slowly. You move the boundary markers, hopefully it is positive, liberating, more space, etc. Now the government has over the years been very careful with this, and now it's giving tremendous support for the arts, really.
And speaking about the support of the arts, is there any one poem itself that you've written in your early years that has caused a change the way Singapore is today, and, or even probably implement a policy that has become a reality?
No.
Really?
Literature cannot have that kind of fundamental influence.
Really? Why do you say that?
No. Literature's influence
are you trying to be modest?
No, literature's influence is indirect. It's indirect. Even the great works like Dante's Inferno Purgatorio, what it did to the Italian language took time. No, I don't think there's any poem by an individual in history that has really changed the government. Not even Sangor's poetry, and Sangor was president of his own country. Now, the influence of poetry is one that diffuses and moves in. It changes sensibilities. It just shifts a little bit of thought, adds a stone, adds a piece in the mosaic. It does all these things. Like for instance, Ulysses by the Mala, it has helped focus attention on how we write about icons. How do we do icons? There are people who are for it, there are people who are against it. Okay, now this is part of the public psyche, as it were, part of a public debate. Very few poems have shaken. Very few poems have brought about a revolution, not many. You can bring about a revolution within the art, within the thinking about the art, but you don't change the larger structure. I'm really hard-pressed to think of one. Can you think of one poem that has really, brought about a revolution, that has brought about a fundamental change? No.
No.
Major influence, yes. Like for instance, Pablo Neruda's poem Machu Picchu, a series of poems about Machu Picchu, constructing that South American historical experience into something massive for the country, into which you could feed in themes like colonialism, anti-colonialism, religion, freedom, etc., ethnicity, and so on. You could put it into that structure. So the influence there is the influence on sensibility, not on changing the politics. I don't think any poem has ever brought down the government.
Maybe implement a new policy. Maybe. About your new book, Singapore Pioneer Poets, The Best of Edwin Thumboo. Can you tell us a little bit of how you came about and designing,
The butterfly.
The butterfly and also about this book. Did you create this theme?
No. Now this is the work of Edwin, the person behind Epigram. Now when we started discussing this, I discussed it with one of his editors. We were talking about selected poems. Now selected poems I was quite happy. But then for marketing purposes, they said they should have the best of. Now that left me very uncomfortable, frankly.
Why is this so?
Because you see, when you say best of,
it sounds like a retirement age.
well, I did say at the launch that a slightly obituary flavor, but more than that, when you say the best of, it's a judgment. Selected, yes, you've got many reasons for selecting, but when you say best of, the basic criteria implied is that it's literary quality. It may be a fascinating poem in terms of its subject, but if it's not a well-written poem, it shouldn't be there, because it's best of. If it were to say the most interesting of, or the most personal of, whatever, is a different matter. Once you have the word best there, it's judgmental. So I had to re-look at the selection again and remove certain poems, which I would have left had it been selected. But best of, I said the poem shouldn't be there. And even right now in the book, there are some poems I would leave out. But coming back to the butterfly.
Oh yes, the butterfly. Is that your idea?
Yes, but the designer at Epigram, her name is in the book, and she did a brilliant job. You can see her name is here in the book, and she did a fabulous job. You see, cover design by Bay K.E. She did a brilliant job. For me, the butterfly is important because people see the butterflies as something transient. It's something that fades. You can see the butterflies behind us. Butterflies have always been a very important part of my sense of surroundings and time and place. For me, the butterfly is...
Is that something that you got inspired even during your growing up years, even in the war?
Absolutely no. In Mandai.
Oh.
Mandai, I was born in Mandai, the 14th milestone, in other words, along Mandai Road. As you go along BKE towards Johor, and when you crosses Mandai Road, about 300 meters to the left, that's where my grandmother had land, and that's where we had our home. And that's where we had a little enclave of Teochew's Hokkiens there.
Oh.
So,
are you a Teochew Hokkien?
No, my mother is Teochew. So we was a Teochew environment. And Hokkien and Teochew, as you know, are pretty close to each other. So it was a lovely community. And then we had a village further down, where you have the junction of Mandai Road turning off to the Singapore Zoo. Right? And there, Chua Wah Sing's family. Chua Wah Sing is my oldest friend. He's still alive and we still keep in touch. And we became friends probably when we were when I was probably about 3-4 years old, because the family used to go to his father's shop to buy provisions. We're still in touch, Wah Sing and I. And it's tremendous, to be able to have had a friend, or still have a friend and be in touch with somebody over more than 75 years of your life. So butterflies, the countryside, the sound of the wind blowing through bamboo, which is quite different from the sound of wind blowing through trees. There's something special about bamboo because of the thickness of the leaves, the shape of the leaves. Now you learn how to distinguish these different sounds. The sound of water, flowing over stones, the sound of water gushing from a cutting in the hill after rain. These are all different things, different sounds. And the butterflies there, you see different shapes, different styles of movement, different speeds, different times of the year. Some of them are together in a group, some of them are solo types, and so on. And for me, the butterfly is really tremendous. And when I learned about its life cycle, but for me, you see, the butterfly is not a symbol of transience. For me, it's something beautiful, something memorable, color, shape. And you see, it stays in everybody's memory and imagination for a long time. So when I thought I wanted this, so I gave it to her, and she did a terrific job. Now even the things I gave to the National Library, where you have the little thing to say it's donated by so and so, there are butterflies on it. So for me, the butterfly is an important symbol, but not in the conventional way of transience, etc. For me, it's tremendous. It's potent, suggestive, immemorial.
Now, is that the very one thing that you miss of the old Singapore today? Because I mean, you grew up, the pre World War Singapore, and today the present Singapore. Is that the one thing that you miss most?
I miss it, but I also realize it can't be now. At this time and age, you cannot have that anymore. So what has happened? The sense of the countryside is being organized and administered. Like we have our Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, we have our parks. For instance, I used to enjoy going to Punggol, and I have a poem about it. Punggol of 35 years ago, where you rented a kole and you rode across and went to the bungalows on the Johor side, Aibiru. Now, I know you can't have that. You could do it easily before. The only thing you had to watch out for were the ships going to the naval base, the big boats. Otherwise, you could go up and down, no problems. And Punggol has changed. And look at it now. I have a poem, Punggol before and Punggol now. It looks tremendous, but different. I miss the old Punggol, but I also appreciate the new one. But the old Punggol is still with me, it's in my head, it's in my memory. It's part of the circulation of my mind, as it were. But I know you cannot have the old Punggol. We tend to romanticize village life, peace, etc., etc. Believe me, life was tough there, So I accept change, and I miss it, as you suggest. I miss that. But this is why when we travel, the urbanites tend to travel into places with country. Right.
Now, for this book, the best of Edwin Thumboo, are there any pieces of poem that actually gives you the most pleasure and most memorable experience in writing it?
You see, very few whole poems please you that way. There are parts of poems that please you. Where you strike a neat phrase, or a set of lines encapsulate exactly what you mean. But if there's one poem here that I like to read, it'll be Friend. Friend. You see, Friend, family we all know. Friend, I think it's page 71. Page 71, 71. At the zoo, Friend, where are you, Friend? You see, every time you rearrange a poem, your book, incidentally, it has got a few new poems, but by and large, it is poetry that exists and that has been published. I've written a few more poems recently, which I like. But here's one. It's called Friend. Some folks say a rarity. Left with 4 and a bit, I am on the lookout naturally. Vigilant but not obsessed. He will be one who won't mislead even himself, who for good reason will procure from the heart of silence courage enough to breach a solemn promise. Won't render his strength without distress, without reflecting on what means, whose ends. So schooled is he to feel the way insouciance most wounds the self. Strong and patient, perhaps, knowing that bonds are made from earth, sworn and sealed by men, not saints, distracted by the ego, liable to erosion, yet resurrecting through the mystery of sacrifice. To the blooded friend, distance hardly counts for time. Falling leaf is metaphor, shafting light, unveiling its drift is testament. Murals in the sky urge majesty. Whatever the odds, surely he will come. Before then, we rely on him each morning to send the sun. So friends are like that, and over the years as you grow older, your very close friends, they pass on. So your those you can count in 10 fingers, your fingers remain. But the friends are down to a very small number. And but they live in your memory. They speak with you. You still have dialogue with them.
But your words today that's been published, I think it will be remain, I think, for a very long time.
Well, I hope so, and that will be a tribute not merely to the teachers who have taught me, but also to the God who looks after me.
How I'm amazed that you are also one of the longest serving deans in the National University of Singapore. And how does it feel like being nominated and given that title?
Well, you have to go back again in history. When we became independent, Singapore had a limited civil service, a limited defense capacity, etc., etc. So we had to build. So all the first generation people, if I call them then, had at least 3 hats. The official work, the serving on government committees and helping, whether in ministry, culture or education or anywhere. And then ultimately, your poetry or art. You've got 3 things there at least. And then in addition to that, family. So when I joined the university on the 16th of June 1966, after about 9 years plus in the civil service, I started off as an assistant lecturer. Took a big cut in salary, but it didn't matter. But it did matter from the family point of view. But I said, look, okay, this is a new career. This is what I've wanted all along, to teach at the university, to be a teacher, because I come from a family of teachers. Father teacher, 5 sisters teacher, okay, 1 brother teacher, whole lot teachers. So I said, I want to go back and teach. It was in the blood almost. And then when they discover you have admin experience, then you get pushed aside. You start being given additional things. And then you act as vice dean, you act as dean, and then when the National University was formed, incidentally, on the 8th of August, 1980, I still remember the date, and it struck me because it's one day before 9th of August. Some of us were asked to be the first deans of the National University. And then you start building up, you start doing. You had to increase the number of student intake. You had to tackle very specific problems. You had to look at what are the needs of the nation. For instance, I and the head of Chinese studies, at that time Professor Lim Chi-ten, realized that the standard of Chinese was falling, and we knew the importance of Chinese, and therefore we introduced Chinese language as something additional to Chinese studies. So it became a double major. Literature, for instance, we always had English literature but never English language. Well, our graduates were supposed to teach language. So I introduced English language as a major. And we introduced various other subjects now. I didn't work alone, please. We had a team. And everybody worked and everybody contributed. And this was marvelous. And we took credit for it as a team. And the best way to get out of people, as you would know from your own experience, is to give them space and credit them with what they do. If you are the head, you get the credit for being the leader or whatever, or for having built up the team. But they must, because your strongest asset is the smallest strong asset. You start from there. You start building up. So I did this, and in addition to this, I served on various government committees in the Ministry of Culture. We initiated a number of things, like for instance, the present Singapore International Writers Festival started by me and a few other colleagues, like V.T. Arasu, who is dead, Masur S.N., again he's passed on, Wong Ming Voon, who's still around, and a few others. We started it as a Singapore Writers Week, and it developed gradually. The Creative Arts Program, I started it with people in the ministry and young colleagues, including colleagues like N. Pakya. In the ministry, it was Dr. Tan Wee Yok of the Gifted program in the ministry. And then Yap Bo Tiong, who was at that time with Inchcape, he provided the funds for the first one. That's how we came together and we did these things. And when you start something, you push it for as long as possible, and then you step out, you let others take over. You know, and like Center for the Arts, I was the founding director. Now a new director, and things develop. You see, one of the things is to know when to step down and to step out.
Well, that must be a real challenge for you, because many influential men would not like to step down after they've been there for quite a while.
Well,
how do you
no, you see, folks like me have one advantage. We write, we create things. Ultimately, that is what matters. Nobody can take it away from you. They can judge the thing. They can say it's good or bad or whatever. They can ignore it. But it is there, and that is your real making. The other bits of making, when you set up institutions, when you set up programs and so on, it is part of a process. That is part of a larger process. It is not your own. It is not personal. So you contribute and you move on. People remember? Great. If they don't remember, it's the nature of things. But when what you write, this is yours. And having said that, you tell yourself, I owe it to my teachers, to my friends, etc., etc., and above all, to God, to Christ, who looks after me.
Do you have a poem written about your life's work? Or you're still in the making?
If I have enough time, and I'm trying to write about the times I lived through. The I there is the larger I, not me. In that, I will be the small I, if at all, because the times are more interesting. You know, because Singapore's history is absolutely fascinating. If you follow it, you know, some of the insights I've had in changing certain things in how we look at post-colonial literature, so-called, or Commonwealth literature and so on, have arisen from looking at the processes in our society. The fact that we are a multiracial society, the fact that we have had all these challenges, in some ways provides a unique education. And I feel very sad because you can't replicate it. And it only comes from the experience we've had to go through. And you can't reinvent the experience. You can't put the thing into a textbook. You can, but it won't have the same efficacy, it won't have the same power of instruction.
Have you written a quote about cuisine that you had in your early years now? And, I mean, because I noticed that there isn't any yet, I think.
No, I let the digestion juices do the poem.
But is there one?
No,
that you miss most? Any
no,
dish?
no. Oh, yes. There are a lot of things I like. You see, Singapore, we are blessed with the greatest variety of food you can find anywhere in the world.
Yes, but in your growing up years, is there one dish that you miss?
Oh,